Hi there, I'm Sipka, and this is the Apatros Review. In this episode we take a look at this, Paranormal Activity 4, an American film, theatrical release horror film, and this was directed by Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman in the year 2012. Now the DVD I'm reviewing is pretty much the standard issue DVD from Paramount Pictures, and it's of the theatrical cut. And only the Blu-ray I think had the unrated version. Anyway. Now this film premiered in Argentina on the 16th of October 2012. That was its world premiere. And then in the United Kingdom on the 17th of October 2012. And then in Australia, Croatia, Israel, New Zealand, Russia and South Africa on the 18th of October 2012. And then the next day on the 19th of October 2012 in Canada and USA. And then in Serbia on the 24th of October 2012. And then in Italy on the 22nd of November 2012. It was directed by Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman, who were the directors of the previous film, Paranormal Activity 3, written by Christopher Landon, from a story by Chad Feehan, and based on the original film by Oren Peli. Oren Peli and Jason Blum from Blumhouse pretty much produced the film. Now, the Paranormal Activity series of found footage supernatural horror movies have ruled the box office from the late 2000s until just a couple of years into the 2010s. Fading away after the rather dismal performance of Paranormal Activity The Ghost Dimension, the second worst film in the franchise. The one reviewed here is the worst, in my view. At its core, the franchise operated from the rules set up by its micro-budgeted original. A family sets up a system of security cameras, progressively more elaborate and sophisticated with each film, to record evidence of strange supernatural phenomena as it affects their lives. But the kicker here is that in each film so far, recording the footage literally has no effect on the fate of the families involved. In fact, the only benefit is for us to watch. Hence the whole found footage thing. Now, the original Paranormal Activity was a no-budget marvel with subtle scares and minimalist filmmaking, made by an Israeli video game designer who spent the best $15,000 he ever had into making an ultimately lightweight, yet astoundingly effective festival movie that gained an impressive word-of-mouth campaign that got a worldwide theatrical release 2 years after its festival premiere. The results were phenomenal. I remember watching this when it came out in Australia back in 2009, and getting so unnerved by it that I walked out of the cinema after the film ended, along with the rest of the audience, with a pale face that made me look like I've seen the proverbial ghost, or in this case seen evidence of what damn near resembled one. As for the sequels, Blumhouse, a small studio that used the franchise to etch itself a niche in Hollywood, as a go-to shop for modestly budgeted B films in the horror genre, and eventually the wokest studio in Hollywood with their increasingly activist virtue signaling exercises, for example the 2019 remake of Black Christmas, teamed up with Paramount, a major studio that has attained a reputation amongst fans of modern classic horror as a studio that hates horror, given their treatment of the cult classic The Keep and the whole Friday the 13th franchise. Now about that, look, some studios have certain genres that they specialize in. 20th Century Fox has always been into big budget war movies and sci-fi films and action. Universal was always the most horror friendly. In fact, Universal was the one that the first American studio that pretty much did horror films. I mean, the classics in the 1930s, commonly known as the Golden Age of Horror. And Paramount, they just suck at horror. I mean, look, the thing is, pretty much pretty much the prime example of Paramount's embarrassment of horror, at least during the 80s, was pretty much with the Friday the 13th series. And look, they did make a number of other slasher films as well, but they were just embarrassed by it. They hated horror. And no better way to prove this is pretty much by looking at the Friday the 13th franchise. They only made the numerous sequels throughout the 80s pretty much just for the money. They hated the genre, they hated the franchise, and they were embarrassed by it. In fact, it got to the point that by the late 80s, when it came around to making Friday the 13th Part 7, New Blood, and Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, they just pretty much got fed up and let the MPA just cut those two films to shreds. In fact, John Carl Buechler, the makeup effects guy who directed The New Blood, he went to his grave not being able to get the uncut version of his film released. I mean, there is actually a work print version of the film that is available on, like, as an extra on DVDs, but it's in fact the only uncut versions of the Friday the 13th films you're gonna find are the original and the Jason Goes to Hell. That's it. All the other Paramount Friday the 13th do not exist in the uncut versions, only in the cut versions. Of course, in the case of Friday the 13th Part 2, there was a little bit of an issue that they had to uncut. I'll explain more about that when the time comes. But the thing is, and only the original Friday the 13th was actually a co-production between Paramount and Warner Bros. Warner Bros. Actually released the film in the international market, while Paramount did the domestic versions. That's why if Americans buy a DVD, Australian DVD or a foreign DVD of the original Friday the 13th, you'll notice it has the Warner Bros. Thing on it. Anyway, yeah. So if you're a filmmaker and you want to make a horror movie, do not do it with Paramount. Paramount just hates horror. In fact, they're still to this day embarrassed about the Friday the 13th series. Anyway, now, now as for Paranormal Activity, Paramount and Blumhouse decided to make a long, ever decreasingly inferior line of sequels to the original film with mixed results. That being said, the first two sequels, or prequels actually, Paranormal Activity 2 and 3, were actually pretty decent follow-ups that managed to extend the story of the original to something pretty interesting, even though they left a great deal behind the origin of the Toby Demon unexplained, so the fans can do the hard yards piecing together the story puzzle with their various fan websites and online discussions. They also made logical uses of the footage and should stay the trilogy without any further entry spoiling the franchise's standing in the horror community. But, alas, Paranormal Activity 4 is essentially the worst film in the franchise, offering absolutely nothing tangible to the franchise mythology. The only thing this film is offering in terms of novelty value is the whole Kinect footage angle, which I'll get into momentarily. As such, doesn't provide any answers that the fans needed, only an almost completely worthless diversion on a wild goose chase. The story here is simple. 5 years after her demonically possessed Katie killed her boyfriend, sister, and brother-in-law, and abducted her 1-year-old nephew Hunter, and disappeared into the night wearing nothing but blood-stained pajamas, Katie and a young boy around Hunter's age named Robbie move into an abandoned house in Nevada, where she sends Robbie into the house of the family across the street to make friends with his 6-year-old adopted son Wyatt, while his parents and 15-year-old sister Alex puzzle over Robbie's intentions and creepy nature. When Alex's 21-year-old boyfriend Ben, who seems fond of recording his underage girlfriend's video chats in a questionable use of webcams, and look for that guy, buddy, listen, computer cameras don't just record webcam footage unless somebody intentionally hacks one. So either you are deliberately letting some hacker use your girl's webcam, or you're doing it yourself, not the computer itself. Because he claims that the computer is doing it itself. That's bullshit. Anyway, he decides to get Alex to set up laptops with webcams, taping 24/7. I wonder where the bulk of this footage goes to. Not a one of these computers, and we're talking about laptops made in the mid-2000s here. Maybe as late as 2010, but not later than that. All of these seem to have the magical amount of storage space to store all this recorded footage, unless they have adjusted the settings to compress it for files to the lowest quality. Pretty much like me using my old DVD recorder to use SLP mode and taping footage to DVD, which can store up to 6 hours of footage on a standard 4.7GB single-layer DVR, but at the price of the lowest quality you can have, looking worse than VHS tapes. And getting the bright idea of using the Xbox console's Kinect device to detect the invisible friend that Robbie has brought into the house. In case you're not familiar with the Kinect device, it's basically a device used with either Xbox or Nintendo Wii. I don't use those consoles, don't judge me, I'm a PlayStation guy. To play certain games or use your body to interact with the game you're playing, like dancing or party games. There's a whole bunch of games made by, especially for the Nintendo Wii, that use the Kinect console. And the Kinect, pretty much the basis here is that Kinect uses an infrared light tracking system that emits 1,000 light beams. So when you turn off the lights in the room and view the room through the night vision of a separate camera, you can theoretically see the light dots that the Kinect uses to track movement, and thereby seeing any ghost as a presence would disturb a tracking dot's path. It is an admittedly interesting idea, but ultimately it doesn't accomplish anything other than failing to convince the average disbelieving parents, or providing any real-time warnings to the protagonists, unless you're just sitting there watching night vision. We do get to see our first tangible evidence of Toby the Demon, although there's one scene where Wyatt is talking to Toby but he's facing off-screen, and we suddenly realize that the ghostly entity about the shape of a boy behind Wyatt isn't Toby. If that happens to be the case, then who the fuck is that ghost behind Wyatt? Soon Wyatt is discovering that he is Hunter, as Robbie tells him about it, and Alex realizes that Katie is trying to get Wyatt/Hunter back for some rather unknown reason. It is also unclear who Robbie actually is. Looking back at it a few hours after watching it, I do suspect that Robbie might actually be a ghost. Since we never see the invisible boy ghost when both boys are on screen in the Kinect footage, Robbie could be Toby's flesh and blood persona to approach Wyatt and prepare for his induction to the witch coven that controls Katie. Just a theory, but I'm going by the visual evidence here. Plus, you have to factor in that Robbie disappears by the time of the final third of the film. Just disappears. You don't see him again. Anyway, nobody in the family has any real chance of survival by this point. Now, Paranormal Activity 4 is a film that has, outside of the dubious merit of being the first horror movie to use Kinect to detect a ghostly demon entity, nothing new to add to the franchise, and is essentially an excuse to cram in as many stupid jump scares into its 80 or so minute runtime as it possibly can. The characters of the heroine and her creeper boyfriend are decent, but the parents are useless, and the film isn't a little scary. In fact, it's just plain unintentionally hilarious, the lazy writing and sloppy direction that's gripped this film. And that's kind of strange because the director actually pretty much did a decent film with the previous one. Now, this is quite simply a useless sequel for a franchise that should have ended at the previous film. Now, for gore nudity, there's no gore, but some more of Katie's hands-on killing. The neck break she performs here in The Boyfriend is brutal, and no nudity. Although I did have questions on why the boyfriend has his computer record his underage girlfriend while she sleeps at night. That is, morally speaking, as clear as mud. Now, Paranormal Activity 4 earns itself a D, 2 out of 10. Thoroughly bad film. Not terrible, but just bad. Now for the DVD. This was released in Australia on DVD and Blu-ray by Paramount Pictures in both the theatrical and unrated versions. Obviously, keeping in mind that in Australia we have compulsory classification, so the unrated versions are actually still classified. Unrated just being for the Americans. Although this Australian DVD only has the theatrical cut. As for the unrated, you're not missing out on anything important, trust me. And as far as the DVD is concerned, technical quality is top-notch. Paramount may not like the horror genre, but at least they do a good job on the DVDs. Now, every shot in the movie looks as clear as it should. Even the Kinect infrared footage is clear enough so you could theoretically count every dot in the frame if you pause the film. I saw no issues with the print at all, and the solitary English 5/448 kilobyte soundtrack, I'm not counting the DVS track since that's irrelevant to anyone with a working eyesight, is clear enough to understand without pumping up the volume. There are 2 sets of English subtitles, and both of these work fine, as well as a supplement consisting of the deleted scenes they decided not to stick into either the theatrical or unrated version of the film. Most of them have any purpose other than padding, but the last 3 scenes do provide some much needed context. One has the mother convince Alex to take a sleeping pill, which later gets in trouble with her husband, while the other is Alex confronting her parents over Wyatt's adoption. And that actually kind of brings up a whole bunch of questions. The menu resembles that of the previous 2 sequels with white text on a black background and a red underline cursor to highlight the user's choice. So, to reiterate, Paranormal Activity 4 gets a D, 2 out of 10. It's generally bad. Okay, that's it for Paranormal Activity 4, with a D, 2 out of 10. I will do Paranormal Activity the marked ones tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow, so we'll see more about that. And I'll do the original and Ghost Dimension sometime in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Now, I do not do requests, but if you have any questions about DVDs or films, just hit me in the comment section, I'll be happy to answer. Hope you guys are staying safe, take it easy, don't let the corona bug bite, and see ya.